Here is a rewritten version with the same meaning, more emotional flow, engaging for listeners, and avoiding common YouTube risk words. No headings, English only. My own children took everything from me, and at 60 years old, I found myself working as a waitress. Every day I shared my lunch with a frail old man whose hands shook as he ate. One afternoon, my son walked in, laughing at what my life had become. "You look miserable," he said. Then everything stopped. 4 men in dark suits entered the diner. The old man slowly stood up, pointed at my son, and said something no one there could have imagined. In that moment, my entire life changed. "I'm glad you're here. Stay with me until the end, and tell me the city you're watching from so I can see how far my story has traveled. My name is Colette." At 60, I never imagined I would be wearing a cheap polyester uniform, my feet aching in worn shoes, carrying plates for people who barely noticed me. I thought this chapter of my life would look very different. I believed I would be enjoying quiet mornings, living off my late husband's pension, maybe traveling a little, watching my grandchildren grow. Instead, life humbled me when I least expected it. The Murphy's diner uniform hung awkwardly on my frame, 2 sizes too large. The red fabric was faded from years of washing, and the name tag on my chest read Colette in chipped white letters. Sometimes I caught my reflection in the metal coffee pot and barely recognized the woman staring back. She looked tired, smaller somehow, invisible. It had been 3 weeks since I started working at the diner. 3 weeks since my life collapsed. The other waitresses were kind, especially Ruth, who had worked there for 15 years. She taught me how to balance multiple plates without shaking, how to remember orders without writing them down, and how to keep smiling even when your legs felt like they might give out. "You'll get used to it," she told me on my first day, tightening my apron with gentle hands. "Give it about a month. Your body will stop protesting." But it wasn't my body that hurt the most. It was my heart. Mornings were the hardest. People rushing in for coffee, construction workers ordering heavy breakfasts before long shifts, older couples sharing quiet moments over pancakes. I watched them and wondered how many of them had children who truly loved them, children who would never do what mine did. I tried not to think about Carlton and Rebecca, but they were always there in my thoughts, my son and daughter, the 2 people I had given everything to. I worked extra hours to put them through school. I trusted them with every dollar Robert and I saved over 40 years together. After my husband passed away, I was exhausted, overwhelmed by grief. 6 months later, they told me I needed to sign some paperwork. They said it would simplify things, help with taxes, make life easier as I got older. I didn't read closely, I trusted them. Those papers weren't about convenience. They transferred ownership of my home, my savings, my future. By the time I understood what had happened, the house was gone, the accounts were empty, and debts appeared in my name that I never agreed to. "We're helping you, Mom," Rebecca said when I confronted her, her voice sweet and rehearsed. "You don't need all that space. This will help you live simply." Carlton didn't bother pretending. "You would have wasted it anyway. At least the money stayed in the family." Family. The word no longer felt warm. So I ended up in a tiny studio apartment with thin walls and a noisy heater, working long shifts just to pay rent and buy food. It wasn't much, but it was mine. The only thing left that truly belonged to me. One afternoon during the lunch rush, as I refilled coffee cups, I noticed him. An elderly man sitting alone by the window in the corner booth. He was thin, with silver hair and hands that trembled slightly when he lifted his cup. His clothes were clean but worn, like they had seen many years. What stood out most was the way he ate, slowly, carefully, as if every bite mattered, as if he wasn't sure when the next meal would come. I recognized that feeling. I had been eating the same way since losing everything. He ordered the least expensive item on the menu, coffee and toast. When it was time to pay, he counted exact change from a small coin pouch, placing each coin down with care. Something about him reminded me of my father. The same quiet dignity, the same tired acceptance in his eyes. When I set his plate down, he looked up at me and smiled. "Thank you, dear," he said softly. His voice was calm, educated, with a faint accent I couldn't quite place. "You're welcome," I replied, and for the first time since I started that job, I truly meant it. Throughout the afternoon, I kept glancing at his table. He stayed for over an hour, stretching that single cup of coffee and piece of toast as long as he possibly could. Here is the rewritten continuation, same meaning, smoother, engaging, and YouTube safe. English only, no headings. When he finally stood up to leave, I noticed the tip he left behind. A single $1 on a $2.50 bill. Nearly half the total. More generosity than I'd seen from people who spent 20 times as much. That night, as I soaked my aching feet in warm water in my tiny bathroom, I couldn't stop thinking about him. There was something familiar in his eyes, the look of someone who had lost what mattered most. The next day, he returned. Same booth by the window, same order. Coffee and toast. I brought him extra butter without being asked, and his face softened like I had given him something precious. "That's very kind of you," he said, his voice gentle despite the slight shake in his hands. "We could all use a little extra kindness," I replied, surprised by how natural the words felt. He nodded slowly, as if he understood exactly what I meant. Over the next several days, he became part of my routine. Every morning at 11:30, he arrived right on time, ordered the same simple meal, and sat in the same spot. I learned his name was Lance when I overheard him give it to Ruth while taking a phone call. By the end of my first month at Murphy's, I felt oddly protective of him. Maybe because he reminded me of my father, or maybe because I recognized myself in the way he counted his coins, in how deeply he appreciated even the smallest kindness. One especially busy Thursday, I noticed Lance hadn't touched his toast. He sat quietly, staring out the window, his hands folded in his lap. Something felt wrong. During a brief pause in orders, I walked over. "Are you all right, Lance?" He looked up, and what I saw in his eyes made my chest tighten. A deep, heavy sadness, the kind you carry for years. "I was thinking about my children," he said softly. "Sometimes I wonder if they think about me at all." The words hit me harder than I expected. Here was someone else carrying the same unanswered love. Without thinking, I slid into the seat across from him. I knew I wasn't supposed to sit with customers, but I couldn't help myself. "I understand," I said quietly. "More than you might think." Lance studied me for a long moment, and I had the strange feeling he was seeing past the uniform, past the tired smile. "Do you have children?" he asked. "Two," I said. "A son and a daughter." My fingers brushed the photo tucked into my apron pocket, the one I couldn't bring myself to throw away, even though it hurt every time I looked at it. "They've made their choices." He nodded slowly. "It's a unique kind of pain," he said, "when the people you love decide you no longer matter to them." My eyes burned, but I forced myself to blink it back. I couldn't fall apart there. "I should get back to work," I said, starting to stand. "Please wait," Lance said, urgency slipping into his calm voice. "Would you mind if I bought you lunch after your shift? Only if you don't already have plans." I looked at this fragile man, likely living with less than I was, offering something he could barely afford. Warmth spread through me, the first real warmth I'd felt in months. "I'd like that," I said, "but I'll pay. I get an employee discount." He smiled, and for a brief moment, the heaviness in his eyes lifted. "That's very kind of you, Colette." As I returned to the counter, something unfamiliar stirred inside me. Hope. Maybe my own children had turned away. Maybe I was truly alone in that sense. But kindness still existed, even in unexpected places. I had no idea then that this quiet man would soon change my life, or that my simple compassion was being noticed far more closely than I realized. That first lunch together changed something between us. After my shift ended, we sat in the back booth, sharing the daily special meatloaf and mashed potatoes, talking as if we were old friends reunited after years apart. Lance ate slowly, but I noticed he kept nudging most of the food toward my side of the plate. "I'm not very hungry these days," he said gently when I protested, "and I don't like seeing food wasted." I understood that feeling well. Since losing everything, I'd become painfully aware of every dollar, every crumb. Watching him, I realized something else. Even while struggling, Lance was still looking out for someone else. "Tell me about your children," he said softly, his blue eyes kind but attentive, "if you don't mind." And somehow I told him everything. About Carlton and Rebecca, about working double shifts to send them to college, about the home Robert and I bought when they were small, the one we cared for decades, about the trust I gave them, the papers I signed the moment I realized what they had done. "They said it was for my own good," I whispered, "that I was too old to handle things on my own, that they were protecting me." Lance listened without interrupting, nodding now and then. I noticed his hands had stopped shaking as I spoke, as if focusing on my story eased his own pain. "And where are they now?" he asked gently. "Carlton lives in my old house," I said, "with his wife and my grandchildren." My voice faltered. "I haven't seen them since." Here is the rewritten continuation, keeping the meaning, improving flow and emotion, and avoiding YouTube risk words. English only. No headings. I swallowed and nodded. Rebecca moved to California. She sends a holiday card once a year with a photo of her family, as if that somehow fixes everything. "Do they know you work here?" Lance asked. "Carlton does," I said quietly. "He drove past the diner a few weeks ago, saw me through the window." I paused. He didn't come inside. Lance fell silent, his fingers resting against the table. When he finally looked up, something in his expression had changed. There was a firmness there that hadn't been before. "People show who they really are when they believe no one important is watching," he said calmly. "Your son made his choice that day." The way he said it sent a faint chill through me, though I couldn't explain why. After that first lunch, Lance and I settled into a steady rhythm. Every day at exactly 11:30 he arrived, ordered his toast and coffee, and waited patiently while I worked between tables. When my shift ended, we shared the daily special, splitting both the cost and the food. Those conversations became the highlight of my day. Lance was thoughtful and well-spoken. He talked about places he had visited when he was younger, Paris, Tokyo, London, but he was always vague about his career. "I worked in business," he would say with a shrug. "Nothing glamorous, numbers, meetings, paperwork." Yet every now and then, I noticed things that didn't quite add up. The way he stood straighter when he thought no one was watching. The watch on his wrist, far nicer than you'd expect from someone counting coins for toast. The way people unconsciously moved aside for him, lowering their voices when he passed. Most of all, Lance noticed people. He paid attention to who treated the staff kindly and who didn't. He never spoke harshly, but I could tell he was quietly observing everything. "That man in the blue suit," he said one afternoon, nodding toward a customer who had spoken sharply to Ruth. "He believes his money makes him superior, but money doesn't create character, does it?" "No," I said. "It doesn't." "Character," Lance replied, his voice firmer than usual, "is revealed by how we treat people who can do nothing for us, and those who think circumstances define worth often forget how quickly circumstances can change." That chill returned. There was something about the way he spoke, as if he understood the world in ways I didn't. 3 weeks into our friendship, Lance didn't show up. When 11:30 passed, I kept glancing at the door, uneasy. He had become such a constant in my routine that his absence felt wrong. He returned the next day looking weaker than usual. His hands shook more, and he struggled to get comfortable in his seat. "Are you feeling okay?" I asked as I set down his coffee. "Doctor's appointment," he said lightly, "just part of getting older." But after my shift, when we sat together, he barely touched his food. "Lance," I said gently, "are you sure you're all right?" He studied me for a long moment, then spoke quietly. "Do you ever wonder if you matter to anyone, Colette? If your presence makes any difference at all?" The question struck deeper than I expected. Every day, I admitted. I thought I mattered to my children. I worked my whole life to give them everything, but when I needed them, they disappeared. He was silent so long I thought he wouldn't answer. Then he spoke. My wife passed away 2 years ago, he said. I cared for her through her illness, appointments, treatments, nights without sleep. My children visited twice. At the service, they spent more time talking about the house than comforting their father. My chest tightened. I'm so sorry, Lance. They wanted me to sell everything, he continued, move into a facility. They said it would be easier for them. His smile was sad but steady. I told them I would decide how to live my life. They haven't contacted me since. We sat quietly, two people bound by the same quiet understanding. You matter to me, I said suddenly. These lunches, these conversations, they're the best part of my day. You matter, Lance. He reached across the table and squeezed my hand, his grip gentle but sincere. You matter to me as well, he said softly, more than you realize. The following week brought a hectic afternoon. We were short-staffed, and the lunch rush felt endless. I moved from table to table trying to keep up when I realized Lance still hadn't been served. I'm so sorry, I said when I reached him. We're overwhelmed today. Please don't worry about me, he replied. Take care of the others first. But 15 minutes passed, and he still hadn't eaten. He looked exhausted. Without thinking, I went to the back, grabbed the sandwich I had brought from home, and placed it in front of him. Colette, I can't take your lunch, he said, startled. You can, I replied firmly. And you will. I'll eat later. He stared at the sandwich, then at me. His eyes filled with tears. Here is the rewritten continuation, same meaning, stronger emotional pull, smooth pacing, and YouTube safe. English only, no headings. No one has shown me this kind of kindness in years, he said quietly. Everyone deserves kindness, I replied. Especially those who were hurt by the people who were supposed to love them. As I watched Lance eat my simple sandwich as if it were something special, I had no idea that this small moment was being carefully observed. I didn't know that someone with a lifetime of experience was quietly studying my actions, weighing sincerity in the smallest details. I didn't know that Lance's trembling hands were steadier than they appeared, or that his worn clothing concealed far more than hardship. I only knew that this lonely man mattered to me, and that by caring for him, I was slowly finding pieces of myself I thought were gone forever. Sharing what little I had reminded me of something important. Having nothing didn't mean being nothing. I didn't know then that everything I believed about Lance would soon be turned upside down, or that one shared sandwich would set powerful events into motion. The day my life shifted again began like any other. It was a cold Tuesday in November, gray and biting, the kind of day where the wind cuts through your coat and reminds you that winter is coming whether you're ready or not. The diner was packed. People wanted hot food and warm coffee before heading back into the cold. I was refilling cups when I saw him through the window. Carlton, my son. He was walking toward Murphy's with that familiar, confident stride, the same one he had as a child, as if the world naturally made room for him. My heart lurched, caught between hope and dread. For one foolish second, I thought maybe he had come to see me. Maybe regret had finally reached him. Maybe he wanted to make things right. Lance sat at his usual table by the window, quietly eating his toast. I saw him notice Carlton approaching, saw his eyes narrow slightly, but I was too caught in my own storm of emotions to pay attention. The bell above the door rang, and Carlton stepped inside, brushing rain from his expensive coat. He wore a perfectly fitted dark suit, polished shoes, and a watch that caught the light. He looked successful, confident, exactly like the man he always wanted to become. His eyes swept across the diner with thinly disguised disdain, the worn booths, the crackling radio, the smell of coffee and grease, the people inside, workers in dusty clothes, elderly couples counting coins, a tired mother trying to keep her child calm. Then he saw me. I stood by the coffee machine, my uniform wrinkled from the rush, hair slipping loose, my hands shaking around the pot. For a moment we just stared at each other. I searched his face for recognition, for warmth, for even a hint of regret. Instead, he smiled. But it wasn't the smile I remembered. It was cold, calculating, almost amused. He walked toward me, his shoes clicking loudly against the worn floor. The diner grew quiet. Conversations faded as people sensed something uncomfortable unfolding. "Well, well," Carlton said, his voice carrying through the room. "Look at this." "Carlton," I whispered, "I didn't expect to see you here." "I bet you didn't," he said, smiling wider. "I was driving by and thought I recognized something through the window. Had to check." His eyes moved slowly over me, the cheap uniform, the worn shoes, the name tag on my chest. "You look—" He paused, pretending to think. "Pitiful." The word landed like a blow. Heat rushed to my face as every pair of eyes in the diner turned toward us. "I mean," he continued, louder now, "I knew things were tight for you, but I never imagined they were this bad. A waitress at 60. He shook his head with mock sympathy. "That's just sad, Mom. Really sad." "Please," I said quietly. "Can we talk somewhere private?" "Private?" He laughed sharply. "Why would we need that? I'm not embarrassed. Are you? Embarrassed by your choices?" Tears burned behind my eyes, but I forced them back. I would not cry here, not in front of him. "You know why I'm here," I said softly. "You know what happened to my money." His expression hardened. "Your money? You mean what happened when you finally had to live within your means? When you couldn't rely on Dad's pension forever?" The lie flowed so easily that for a moment I almost questioned myself, but I knew the truth. "I trusted you," I whispered. "And I helped you," he snapped back. "I helped you face reality. This is what happens when you can't manage your finances." From the corner of my eye, I saw Lance shift in his seat. He had stopped eating completely. His hands were no longer shaking. "You look ridiculous," Carlton continued, his voice rising. "A 60-year-old woman in a polyester uniform serving coffee. Do you have any idea how embarrassing this is for me? For Rebecca? Do you know what people say when they find out our mother works here?" The diner was completely silent, and that was when everything changed. Here is the rewritten continuation, same meaning, stronger tension, cinematic pacing, and YouTube-safe language. English only, no headings. "I'm sorry if my lack of money causes you discomfort," I said, surprised by the steadiness in my voice. Carlton laughed. "Lack of money? Is that what you call this? Mom, you made choices. You signed papers without reading them. You failed to plan. This isn't misfortune. This is the result of your decisions." Every word was carefully aimed, not just to hurt me, but to rewrite the story so none of it was his fault. And in that moment, I understood something with painful clarity. Carlton felt no guilt. In his mind, he hadn't taken anything. He had simply claimed what he believed belonged to him from a woman he saw as weak. "I worked my entire life," I said, my voice growing firmer despite the sting in my eyes. "I gave everything to you and your sister. I paid for college. I helped you get started. I gave you every chance I could." "And what did you expect?" he replied with a thin smile. "Some kind of lifetime support just for being a mother? That's not how life works. Children don't owe their parents anything." The diner had gone completely silent. Every customer, every employee was watching. I felt stripped bare, reduced to a spectacle for strangers. Then something happened that I never expected. Lance stood up. He moved slowly at first, like the fragile man everyone believed him to be. But as he straightened, something changed. His posture shifted. His movements became calm, deliberate. The shaking in his hands was gone. He walked toward us. Carlton barely glanced at him, clearly assuming this was just another elderly man passing by. But Lance stopped directly in front of him and looked up with eyes that were suddenly sharp and unyielding. "Excuse me," Lance said, his voice steady. carrying authority I had never heard before. I couldn't help overhearing. Carlton frowned. This is a private family issue. It doesn't concern you. Lance smiled, but it wasn't the gentle smile I knew. This one was cool and precise. I've been coming to this diner for some time, he said calmly, and during that time, I've watched people, observed how they behave when they believe no one important is paying attention. Carlton looked irritated. I don't know who you think you are, but your mother, Lance continued, cutting him off, has shown me more genuine kindness than anyone has in years. She shares her food when I cannot afford much. She listens. She treats me with respect, despite having every reason to be bitter. Carlton's expression tightened. That's nice, but this still isn't your concern. Lance stepped closer. Something in his presence made Carlton shift backward without realizing it. And yet, Lance said quietly, his voice low but carrying through the room, you stood here and publicly humiliated the woman who gave you life. You mocked her for working honestly to survive. You did it in front of strangers. Carlton's face flushed. Now hold on. What kind of man does that? Lance asked, his eyes locked on Carlton's. What kind of character is revealed by such behavior? The air in the diner felt heavy, charged. No one spoke, no one moved. Carlton straightened his shoulders, trying to regain control. This is between me and my mother. You're out of line. Lance nodded slowly. You're right. This is between you and your mother. Then he reached into his jacket and pulled out a phone. It was sleek and expensive, completely out of place with his worn clothes. But before you continue, Lance said calmly, there's something you should know. He pressed a number and lifted the phone to his ear. When someone answered, his voice changed completely. Sharp, professional. Marcus, it's Lance. I need a full background review. Name is Carlton Matthews. Carlton blinked. Who are you calling? Carlton Matthews, Lance repeated into the phone. I want everything. Employment, financial ties, professional connections, make this priority. He ended the call and slipped the phone back into his pocket. The diner was so quiet I could hear the coffee machine humming. Carlton had gone pale. Who are you? Lance studied him for a moment, then smiled again, controlled, unreadable. Someone who believes deeply in accountability, he said softly. Someone who has spent a lifetime learning that actions matter, and someone who has just learned exactly who you are. Then Lance turned to me. His expression softened, though his eyes remained alert and focused. And that was when I realized the trembling old man I had shared my lunch with was not who I thought he was at all. Here is the rewritten continuation, preserving meaning, tightening emotion, and keeping it YouTube safe. English only, no headings. Colette, my dear, he said gently, as if nothing extraordinary had just happened. Would you mind if we continue this tomorrow? I believe your son and I may have a few things to discuss. I nodded without really thinking. My mind was spinning. The man standing in front of me was not the fragile, uncertain figure I had shared lunches with. He was someone entirely different. As Lance passed Carlton on his way to the door, he paused. His voice was calm, but every word carried through the silent diner. You should have come inside that day, he said quietly, when you saw your mother working here. You should have treated her with the respect she deserved. You chose not to, and choices have outcomes. The bell chimed as he stepped outside. The diner erupted into noise, but I barely heard it. I was staring at my son's face, pale and shaken, wondering who Lance truly was and what he meant by outcomes. Carlton turned to me, panic flickering in his eyes. Mom? Who is that man? How do you even know him? For the first time in months, something unfamiliar stirred in my chest. It felt like hope. I thought he was just a lonely old man, I said softly. But I think I was wrong. I barely slept that night. The scene replayed again and again in my mind. The Lance. I thought I knew. Frail, hesitant, counting coins had vanished in seconds, replaced by someone who commanded attention with a single phone call and left my grown son shaken. The next morning, I arrived early, hoping Lance would come in before his usual time. I needed answers. I needed to understand who he really was. Ruth noticed immediately. "You look exhausted, honey. Everything okay?" "I'm fine," I said, though even I could hear the strain in my voice. "Just tired." But I wasn't fine. My hands trembled as I wiped tables and refilled shakers. Every time the doorbell rang, my heart jumped. At 11:15, the door opened. Lance walked in looking exactly like the man I had known. Slightly hunched shoulders, careful steps, hands trembling as he hung his worn coat on the hook by his table. But now I knew better. Once you realize something is a performance, you can never unsee it. He sat at his usual table. Our eyes met, and he gave me the same gentle smile he always had. Only now, I saw the sharp awareness behind it, the careful evaluation I had mistaken for simplicity. I walked over, my heart pounding. "Your usual?" I asked. "Actually," he said softly, returning to that familiar, uncertain tone. "I think I'll try something different today. The breakfast special, please, and coffee." The breakfast special cost 5 times more than his usual order. "Of course," I said. When I brought his plate, he gestured to the seat across from him. "Would you sit with me for a moment, my dear? I think it's time we talked." The rush was over. Ruth caught my eye and nodded. I sat down, hands folded tightly. "Who are you?" I asked. Lance smiled. Not the fragile smile, not the cold one from yesterday. Something honest. "My name really is Lance," he said. "Lance Morrison. I am 74. My wife did pass away 2 years ago, and my children truly have turned away from me." He paused, cutting his eggs with steady hands, but I wasn't completely honest about my work. "What did you do?" I asked. "I built companies," he said simply. "Started with nothing after college. Over 50 years I founded, bought, and sold businesses, technology, manufacturing, real estate, restaurants." I stared at him. By the time I retired, I owned or held major stakes in more than 200 companies. My mouth fell open. "Some failed," he continued calmly. "Others succeeded beyond anything I expected." "But the coins," I whispered. "The toast." His expression softened. "After my wife passed, my children were only interested in what they would receive. They wanted everything divided immediately. When I said I needed time, they stopped calling." He set down his fork and met my eyes. "So I decided to learn something. I wanted to see who I was without wealth, and I wanted to see who others were when they believed I had none." "You were pretending," I said slowly. "For 8 months," Lance confirmed. "A small apartment, limited cash, old clothes, just enough to live simply." He looked at me kindly. "And in all that time, you were the one who showed me kindness when you believed I had nothing at all." Here is the rewritten continuation. Same meaning, tightened tension, emotional, and YouTube safe. English only, no headings. "I wanted to experience life the way most people actually live," Lance continued. "But more than that, I wanted to know who would show kindness to an old man who appeared to have nothing to offer in return." The weight of his words settled slowly. "You were testing me," I said. "At first, yes," Lance admitted. "When I began coming here, I watched carefully. I observed how people treated those who couldn't leave generous tips. I paid attention to who was kind when no one was watching and who only performed kindness when it benefited them." He paused, then looked at me with something close to awe. "And then you started sharing your lunch with me. Not because you thought I could help you? Not because you wanted anything from me, but because you saw someone hungry and you had food." His voice thickened. "Do you know how rare that is, Colette? I've known countless wealthy, successful people who wouldn't share a sandwich with a stranger, even if it cost them nothing." Images flooded my mind. The lunches we shared, the extra food I pushed toward him, the times I used my employee discount on his coffee instead of saving it for myself. "You were watching everything," I said quietly. "I was," he replied. And what I saw was a woman who had been betrayed by her own children, left with nothing, forced to start over at 60, and still willing to care for someone who appeared to have even less. Lance reached into his jacket and pulled out his phone again. This time, I noticed details I had missed before, the custom case, the way it fit his hand perfectly. "After your son left yesterday," he said, scrolling, "I made a few inquiries. I wanted to know who Carlton Matthews really is when he believes no one important is paying attention." My stomach tightened. "What did you find?" "Carlton works at Henderson and Associates," Lance said calmly. "A mid-sized consulting firm. He earns about $85,000 a year, but he spends far beyond that. The house he lives in, your house, is heavily mortgaged. He has substantial credit card balances, 2 vehicle payments, and he's been passed over for promotion twice this year." Each detail felt like a blow. The image of my successful, confident son began to crack. "But here's what's most revealing," Lance continued. "He's been telling colleagues that a large inheritance is coming soon. He's already spending money he doesn't have based on assets he believes he'll receive." I frowned. "From his wife's family?" "Yes. Her father owns a small regional business, respectable but modest. That future inheritance divided among siblings won't support the lifestyle Carlton has promised." A wave of nausea hit me. "He took my money because he needed it." "He took your money because he wanted it," Lance corrected gently. "He convinced himself you didn't need it, that he deserved it because he was your son." Lance set the phone aside and looked directly at me. "Colette, what would you say if I told you I could get everything back?" The question stunned me. "That's impossible," I whispered. "There were documents. I signed them." "Documents can be challenged," Lance said, "especially when they were signed during grief, without proper guidance, and benefited parties who abused trust." He leaned closer. "But I'm not talking about courtrooms." "I don't understand." "Remember when I told you about owning over 200 companies?" he asked. "One of them holds the mortgage on your son's house, another owns Henderson and Associates, a third manages the financing on his vehicles." The room felt unsteady. "You own his company?" "Controlling interest," Lance said calmly. "Acquired 3 years ago." His expression sharpened. "Carlton doesn't realize it yet, but his financial stability depends entirely on decisions I make." I couldn't speak. "This is what will happen," Lance continued, his tone precise. "Your son will receive a call today. He'll be told his position is being eliminated due to restructuring. His mortgage will be reviewed and flagged for immediate repayment due to technical issues. His vehicle loans will be reassigned to stricter terms." "Lance," I tried to stop him. "I'm not finished," he said gently. "By the end of the week, he'll face pressures far greater than anything he's experienced before." My head spun. "You're going to ruin him." "No," Lance said quietly. "I'm going to give him a choice." He reached across the table and held my shaking hands in his steady ones. "He can return everything he took from you with interest, and I will reverse every decision. His job, his loans, his home. Or he can continue believing actions have no consequences." His eyes met mine, unwavering. "But this time," he said softly, "the choice will be his." Here is the rewritten continuation. Same meaning, emotionally strong, cinematic, and YouTube safe. English only, no headings. "But more importantly," Lance said, "I'm giving you a choice as well." I looked at him confused. "What kind of choice?" "You can return to your old life," he said calmly. "Your home, your savings, your sense of security. Carlton will learn that treating his mother with cruelty has consequences, and perhaps he'll grow from it." I waited, knowing there was more. "Or," Lance continued slowly, "you can begin a new chapter with someone who understands what it feels like to be betrayed by family, someone who knows the pain of realizing that the people you love see you only as a source of money." The meaning of his words hit me all at once. This wasn't just about recovering what I had lost. It wasn't about payback. It was something far more fragile and far more powerful. A second chance. I don't understand why you would do this for me, I whispered. Lance squeezed my hands gently. Because for 8 months, while I lived as someone with nothing, you were the only person who treated me like a human being, not as someone useful, not as someone to impress, just as a person worthy of care. His voice softened. And because in these past weeks sharing lunches, listening to your stories, watching you stand tall after betrayal, I've felt something I haven't felt since my wife passed away. Peace. Tears streamed down my face, but they weren't tears of pain. They were tears of possibility, of realizing that sometimes life gives you exactly what you need in a form you never expected. What happens now? I asked. Lance smiled, and this time there was no edge to it, only warmth. Now we finish breakfast, he said. Then I make a phone call. And then we see whether your son is capable of learning. As Ruth brought more coffee, I understood something clearly. My life was about to change again. But this time I wasn't falling. This time someone was standing beside me. The phone call came at exactly 2:30 that afternoon. I was serving coffee, my thoughts still tangled, when my phone buzzed in my apron pocket. I froze when I saw the name on the screen, Carlton. I stepped into the back room to answer. My hands shook so badly I almost dropped the phone. "Mom," he said, panic sharp in his voice. "I need to talk to you. Something's wrong." "What kind of wrong?" I asked, already knowing. "I just lost my job," he blurted out. "No warning. They said my position was being eliminated. I have 1 day to clear out my desk." I closed my eyes, feeling a strange mix of relief and sorrow. "I'm sorry to hear that," I said quietly. "Sorry?" he snapped. "That's it?" "Mom, I have a mortgage, car payments, kids. I can't just lose my job." "What do you want me to do?" I asked. Silence stretched between us. Then his voice softened. "I need help, Mom. We're family. Family helps each other." The irony burned. "Like when you helped me?" I asked gently. "That was different," he said quickly. "That was about your finances. This is an emergency." Even now he couldn't say the words that mattered. He couldn't admit fault. He couldn't apologize. "Carlton," I said calmly, "I work at a diner. I live in a tiny apartment. What do you honestly think I can do for you?" "Well, maybe you could work more hours, or get another job, or maybe that old man you've been talking to, Lance, right? Maybe he knows someone." Something hardened inside me. Even now, he saw me as something to use, not a mother, not a person. "The old man?" I repeated slowly. "Yes, Lance. Maybe he has connections." I almost laughed. If only you knew, I thought. "I'll think about it," I said aloud. "Please," Carlton whispered. "I'm scared." "You'll figure it out," I replied, using the same calm tone he once used on me. "You're a smart man, Carlton." And for the first time, I hung up without feeling guilty. Here is the rewritten continuation. Same meaning, strong emotional pacing, and YouTube safe. English only, no headings. "I'm sure you'll figure something out," I said calmly, and I ended the call before he could reply. 20 minutes later, Lance arrived at his usual table. He walked with the same careful steps as always, but now I could see the truth beneath them. The quiet strength behind the appearance of fragility, the sharp mind behind the gentle manner. When I brought him his coffee, he looked up at me warmly. "How are you feeling, my dear?" "Confused," I admitted. "Carlton called. He lost his job." "I know," Lance said simply. His expression remained calm, but there was a quiet satisfaction in his eyes. "And how did that make you feel?" I searched my heart before answering. Part of me feels guilty. He has children, responsibilities. But another part of me feels like, maybe it's time he understood what it's like to have everything taken from you. "Good," Lance said. "That means you have empathy, but not weakness. Feeling concern shows compassion. Accepting consequences shows wisdom." Over the next 3 days, Carlton called 6 more times. Every conversation followed the same pattern. Fear, desperation, pleas for help I couldn't give, then frustration when I didn't fix things for him. By Friday, his tone shifted completely. "This is your fault," he said sharply. "That man Lance, he did something." "What are you talking about?" I asked. "Don't pretend," Carlton snapped. "The timing is too perfect. He threatened me on Tuesday, and by Wednesday my life started falling apart. Who is he? What kind of connections does he have?" "He's a friend," I said calmly. "A friend who can erase a job with one phone call?" Carlton demanded. "A friend who can trigger loans and mortgages? What kind of person has that kind of power?" I didn't answer, but he continued. "I did some digging," he said. "Do you know what I found?" "What?" I asked, keeping my voice steady. "Lance Morrison, 74 years old, estimated net worth somewhere between 500 and 800 million, major stakes in dozens of companies, including the one that fired me." His voice dropped. "You've been having lunch with one of the richest men in the state, and somehow you convinced him to ruin my life." "I didn't convince him of anything," I said honestly. "Lance makes his own choices." "So you knew," Carlton said. "You knew who he was." "I found out the same day you did," I replied. "When he stood up to you in the diner. Before that, I thought he was just a lonely man who needed a friend." Carlton was silent for a long moment. When he spoke again, his voice was different, not angry, not frantic, calculating. "What does he want?" he asked. "Men like that don't do things without a reason. What does he want from me?" I looked across the diner at Lance, sitting peacefully at his table, reading the paper as if nothing in the world concerned him. I knew he could hear every word, knew he was waiting. "I think you should ask him yourself," I said. "What?" "He comes to Murphy's every day at 11:30, table by the window. If you want answers, come talk to him." Carlton didn't speak for nearly a minute. When he finally did, his voice sounded small. "Will you be there?" For the first time in a long while, he didn't sound like a man demanding something. He sounded like a scared child. "Do you want me there?" I asked gently. "Yes," he whispered. "Please." Saturday morning, Carlton walked into Murphy's at 11:45. He looked exhausted, unshaven, wearing wrinkled clothes instead of his usual tailored suit. Dark circles under his eyes told a story of sleepless nights. Lance was already there, eating his toast and sipping coffee. He looked up as Carlton approached, his expression unreadable. "Mr. Morrison," Carlton said hoarsely. "May I sit down?" Lance gestured to the empty chair. Of course. I was nearby, pretending to work, close enough to hear. Carlton sat heavily, his hands shaking. "I know what you did," he said. "Do you?" Lance replied calmly. "What do you believe I did?" "You got me fired. You triggered my loans. You're trying to ruin my life because of my mother." Lance took a slow sip of coffee. "That's an interesting interpretation. Tell me, Carlton, do you believe your life is ruined? I lost my job. I might lose my house. My credit is collapsing. If that's not ruin, what is?" "Consequences," Lance said evenly. "There is a difference." Carlton's face flushed. "Consequences for what? For telling my mother the truth? For helping her understand reality?" Lance set his cup down with deliberate care. "Let me tell you what I see," he said quietly. "I see a man who took everything from his widowed mother and convinced himself it was justified. I see someone who publicly humiliated a woman who sacrificed her entire adult life for his benefit." The diner was silent, and Lance wasn't finished yet. Here is the rewritten continuation, preserving meaning, emotion, and YouTube-safe language. English only, no headings. "I see someone who feels entitled to wealth he didn't earn and respect he never showed to others." Carlton opened his mouth to argue, but Lance raised a hand. "And more than that," Lance continued calmly, "I see a man who has never truly faced the results of his actions, someone who has always been rescued, always shielded from the outcomes of his choices." "What do you want from me?" Carlton asked, his voice barely steady. Lance leaned forward slightly. "I want you to understand something your mother understood at your age. Life isn't fair. Sometimes you lose everything through no fault of your own. And the true measure of a person is how they treat others when they believe they have nothing left to lose." He glanced toward me. Your mother lost everything because she trusted you, and instead of becoming cold or resentful, she chose kindness. She shared her lunch with a stranger who appeared to have even less than she did. That is character, Carlton. That is who your mother is. Carlton followed his gaze to me, and for a brief moment, something shifted in his expression. Not anger, not fear. Something quieter, understanding perhaps. What happens now? Carlton asked. Lance smiled, and this time it wasn't sharp or intimidating, it was hopeful. Now you choose, he said. You can continue believing the world owes you something, that your mother's sacrifices meant nothing, that respect is automatic. He reached into his jacket and placed a document on the table between them. Or, Lance continued, you can sign this. It returns every dollar you took from your mother with interest, and you spend the next year learning what it means to earn your way back into her life. Carlton stared at the paper, frozen. And if I sign it? He asked quietly. Your job will be restored on Monday, Lance said. Your loans return to their original terms. You'll be given the opportunity to become the son your mother deserves. And if I don't? Carlton asked. Lance's expression hardened. Then you'll discover that I have a very long memory and very little patience for those who mistreat people weaker than themselves. The diner was silent. Carlton stared at the paper for a long time. His hands trembled, just as mine once had. Finally, he looked up at me. Mom, he said, his voice breaking, I'm sorry. For everything. It was the first real apology, the first time he admitted he was wrong, the first time he spoke to me like a son instead of someone he needed to control. I walked over and sat beside Lance, facing my son. I know, I said softly. What matters now is what you do next. Carlton picked up the pen. His hands shook, but this time not from fear, from emotion. He signed his name, and for the first time in months, I felt like I might have my son back. 6 months later, I stood in Lance's kitchen watching him struggle to make pancakes from scratch. The hands that had built companies and signed deals worth millions were surprisingly clumsy with a whisk. I believe you're supposed to mix until it's smooth, I said, trying not to laugh. I've built entire corporations, Lance muttered. Surely I can handle breakfast? Different skills, I said gently, taking the bowl from him. Let me help. The house was beautiful, but comfortable. A warm Victorian with sunlight pouring through large windows, shelves filled with books that had actually been read. It felt lived in, real. Lance had asked me to move in 3 months earlier, not as a dramatic gesture, but as a quiet recognition that we had found something rare in each other. Family. We had separate spaces, but shared the rest of the house easily, naturally. How did your call with Carlton go yesterday? Lance asked. Better, I said honestly. He's doing well at work. He and Sarah are in counseling. He asked if I'd like to have lunch with him next week. Rebuilding our relationship had taken time. The money had been returned quickly. Trust had not. Will you go? Lance asked. I think so, I said. He sounded different, humbled, more like the boy I used to know. Lance smiled softly, and in that moment, I realized something important. I hadn't just gotten my life back. I had found a future I never thought was possible. Here is the rewritten continuation, same meaning, emotionally warm, and YouTube safe. English only, no headings. Lance nodded with quiet approval. Good. People can change when the right pressure forces them to look honestly at themselves. And the pressure had been real. Losing everything he took for granted had pushed Carlton to face truths he'd avoided for years. But more than that, seeing me build a life without him, seeing me safe, valued, and genuinely cared for, had shown him exactly what he almost lost forever. Rebecca was different. When Carlton told her what had happened, how he'd been forced to return the money and admit his wrongdoing, she cut off contact completely. She stayed in California. She kept sending holiday cards with smiling family photos. She kept pretending nothing had changed. I got a letter from her yesterday, I told Lance as I poured batter onto the hot griddle. Rebecca? he asked. Yes. Just a few lines. She said she heard I was living with someone and hoped I was being careful not to be taken advantage of again. I flipped the pancake, golden and perfect. She still doesn't understand, I added quietly, that I'm not the victim in this story anymore. Lance wrapped his arms around me from behind, resting his chin gently on my shoulder as we watched the pancakes cook. Does that make you sad? He asked. I thought about it carefully. 6 months earlier, Rebecca's coldness would have shattered me. But now, surrounded by warmth, stability, and genuine care, I felt something different. I'm sad for her, I said at last. I'm sad that she's so afraid of admitting she was wrong that she's willing to lose her mother forever, but I'm not sad for myself anymore. And it was true. The need for my children's approval, the habit of accepting scraps of affection, the constant fear that I wasn't enough, all of that was gone. Lance had shown me what it felt like to be valued simply for who I was. Good, he said softly, squeezing me, because you deserve far more than scraps. After breakfast, we took our usual walk through the neighborhood. Lance still went to Murphy's every day. He still ordered toast and coffee. He still sat at the same table, but now the staff knew exactly who he was. He left generous tips and quietly paid for improvements to the kitchen without ever seeking credit. As we stopped to admire a neighbor's garden, Lance grew thoughtful. I've been thinking about something, he said. What's that? My children, he said. Marcus and Elena. I looked at him with concern. He rarely spoke about them. They don't know about us, he continued. They don't know I've found happiness again. Do you want to tell them? I asked gently. Lance watched a bird building a nest in an oak tree nearby before answering. I used to think I wanted them to come back, he said. I imagined apologies, reunions, but now I realize the family I was mourning doesn't exist anymore. Maybe it never did. Maybe I was holding on to an idea instead of reality. I took his hand as we walked. It's hard to let go of what family should be, I said. Yes, Lance agreed, stopping to face me. But here's what I've learned. Family isn't blood. It isn't obligation. It's choice. It's choosing kindness, choosing care, choosing to stay. His eyes glistened, but his voice was steady. My children chose to walk away when I needed them. You chose to share your lunch with a stranger who could give you nothing in return. You're the one who got my money back, I reminded him. You're the one who made Carlton face consequences. I gave you the power, Lance said gently, but you chose how to use it. He met my eyes. You could have demanded revenge. You could have asked me to destroy your son completely. And for a moment I know you considered it. I had. I didn't want revenge, I said quietly. I wanted my son back. Exactly, Lance said. That's why you're my family now. We walked home in silence, comfortable and peaceful. At the front door, Lance paused. Colette, he said softly, there's something I want to ask you. What is it? I've been thinking about updating my will. Here is the rewritten continuation, same meaning, emotionally rich, and YouTube safe. English only, no headings. Not because I'm planning to leave this world anytime soon, he added quickly, but because I want to be certain that what I've built goes to the people who truly matter. My heart skipped. Colette, Lance said quietly, I want to leave everything to you. The house, the companies, the investments. All of it. You're the only family I have left, and the only person I trust to use it the right way. I stared at him, overwhelmed. I can't accept that. Why not? Because it's too much. Because I don't need it, I said, struggling to explain what I felt, and because I never want you to think I'm with you for your money. Lance smiled, the warm, genuine smile I had come to love. My dear Colette, if money were your goal, you would have discovered who I was months ago. You would have researched me, impressed me, positioned yourself carefully. Instead, you shared a sandwich with a shaking old man and never asked for anything in return. You treated me like family when my own family walked away. You chose kindness over calculation. Inside, Lance retrieved a thick envelope from his desk drawer. "I've already had everything prepared," he said, "but I want you to read it carefully. Ask questions. Take your time. This isn't about obligation. It's about ensuring that what I've built continues to do good." I held the envelope without opening it. "What about Marcus and Elena?" "They'll receive a modest inheritance," Lance replied calmly. "Enough to live comfortably, not enough to be careless, and they'll receive a letter explaining my decision." He sat beside me, his voice steady. "I used to believe family meant endless forgiveness, no matter the harm. I've learned that real love sometimes means setting limits. It means refusing to support harmful behavior, even from people you care about." I thought of Carlton of therapy sessions, hard conversations, and slow progress. I thought of Rebecca, still clinging to pride from afar. "Carlton is changing," I said quietly, "but only because someone held him accountable." Lance nodded. "That's what real family does. It supports growth without enabling destruction." Later that evening, after we reviewed every page together, we sat on the back porch watching the sun sink below the horizon. The papers were signed, but somehow that felt secondary. "Do you ever regret it?" I asked. "Leaving your old life behind?" Lance considered carefully. "I regret that my children and I couldn't learn to love each other better. I regret that money mattered more to them than connection. But I don't regret the path that led me to you. I don't regret discovering that family can be chosen." My phone buzzed. Carlton's name appeared. "Mom, I don't say this enough, but I love you. Thank you for not giving up on me. Lunch on Tuesday?" I showed Lance the message. He smiled. "See?" he said softly. "Change is possible." As darkness settled, I rested my head on his shoulder and thought about the journey that brought me here. Not long ago, I felt broken and invisible. Now I was valued for who I was. "Thank you," I said quietly, "for letting me care for you when I thought you needed it." Lance chuckled. "And thank you for caring when I needed it most, just not in the way either of us expected." Tomorrow, I would meet my son and continue rebuilding. Maybe my daughter would reach out one day, maybe not. But tonight, I was exactly where I belonged with the family I chose and who chose me back. And that, I learned, is worth more than anything money can buy. Now I'm curious about you. What would you have done in my place? Have you ever faced something similar? Share your thoughts in the comments, and before you go, check out the 2 stories on the final screen. They might surprise you. Thank you for staying with my story until the end.